guys, welcome back to the home and homestead. Today we'll be doing part 3 of a multi-part series of what to do with all that zucchini. And today we will be doing a recipe of zucchini salsa. So this is a sweet and spicy salsa using zucchinis, tomatoes, onions, peppers, and a blend of spices to make a really delicious sweet and spicy salsa. So this morning I went out and I harvested from the garden a number of zucchinis and peppers. You also see some pinto beans I purchased from a bulk food store, and watch for in the future I'll be doing a pressure canning of pinto beans so we can use them for refried beans. But here's what we have from the garden today, and while our tomatoes are starting to ripen, there wasn't enough large quantity in order to do the recipe that I'm doing today. So we're fortunate enough to have supplied to us some beautiful Roma tomatoes and some bell peppers. So we will be using those today in the recipe. And these down here are the jalapeno peppers from our garden, and I actually harvested all those this morning. So for this recipe today, you can do it a number of different ways, meaning if you want to be very particular and if you prefer a very chunky and not a lot of fluid to your salsa recipe, you can get your zucchini prepped the day before and chop or shred your zucchini, onions, and bell peppers and put them in a bowl, add salt, that'll draw out the fluid, and the next day you rinse off the salt 2 or 3 times and drain off that fluid. That will have less fluid in your end result of salsa. Also, for the tomatoes, you can blanch them and peel the skins off. However, I do not do that step. Typically, when I do my salsas, I don't mind the little bit of skin that's in there, and when you're chopping or pureeing, it usually isn't too much of an issue. So today we will be doing a prep method using the food processor to chop and shred and get different textures of the fresh vegetables for this salsa today. Leaving the zucchini and peppers and things fresh and putting that immediately into the salsa and cooking that down rather than the overnight prep with salt, because it leaves a lot of nice juices for the salsa end result. And I'd rather have the fresh juices from the tomatoes and zucchini and peppers and things like that rather than having to add water at the end in order to add fluid to my salsa, because I find that that would just water down the end result. If you prefer to do that method, certainly do. You will end with a beautiful chunky salsa that does not have a lot of fluid or liquid in the end result. So as I mentioned before, today we will be using the food processor. So we have the food processor out, and this is a recipe that I will be water bath canning. As with my other canning videos you may have checked out, I like to have all my ingredients out and ready to go. So we have the spices and the canning salt, vinegar, lime juice. I'm just using that one up. And then I have all the jars that I may be using. This stock pot that I use for warming the jars so they are of similar temperature to whatever I will be placing in the jars for canning. I have my large Dutch oven. This is 8.5 quart, and I have my water bath canner out, and I will be using that later. But first, we need to prep all the vegetables and get them cooked down in the Dutch oven. So let's go prep the vegetables for the salsa. Okay, so first we will prep the vegetables, and we'll start with the zucchini. We need 12 cups of chopped zucchini. So depending on how chunky you like your salsa, that'll be a personal preference of how you prepare your zucchini. So what I started with is I took the ends off of my first zucchini and I quartered it. I'm just going to cut it into thirds so it'll fit nicely in my food processor. And to start, I'll just kind of pulse it and see how I like the texture. So let's pulse it and see how it turns out. That's pretty good. It's a nice fine chop. If I put less in at a time, I can have a little more control over that. We'll just try that amount this time. We'll just pulse it. That looks good. The first batch was a little finer than this. This is a little bit more coarse. I like this. It's nice to have a little blend of it though too, because as it cooks, the smaller pieces will cook down. And so I'll just keep chopping with the food processor. I like the consistency of it. All right, so we have 12 cups of the chopped zucchini in the Dutch oven. That took 3 large zucchinis to achieve that. So now we'll move on to the onions. We need 4 medium onions. A couple of these are a little bit smaller, so I did 1 extra. So same thing. I'll just cut off the ends, take off the outer peeling of the onion, quarter them, and I'll put them in the food processor and give them a coarse chop. That gave a nice coarse chop to the onion. So let me finish chopping these onions in the food processor, and we'll move on to the next ingredient for the salsa. So the onions were all chopped, and they came out to 6 cups of the chopped onion. Now we will move on to the bell peppers. 4 large bell peppers is what you will need. So what I'll do is take the stems and the inner membrane and seeds out, and then I'll place them in the food processor and get those coarsely chopped as well. Whatever color bell peppers you want. The green ones would be the most tart, I guess you could say, and then as they ripen on the plant, then they change to yellow, orange, and then red being the sweetest. So I have a combination of yellow and red that I will be using today. So we just cut these into a little bit smaller pieces and get them in the food processor. I think I'll cut into thirds. Oh, nice coarse chop. They smell so nice and sweet and fresh. Let's get the rest of those going. And then we'll move on to the next step of the process. So the bell peppers are all chopped. Those 4 bell peppers ended up being about 4 cups or 1 quart worth of peppers. Next, we'll move on to the jalapeno peppers. So I'll be adding 7 today. We like a spicier, medium to hot salsa. If you like a milder salsa, don't put any, or just put a couple. Do it to your preference. That's where you can kind of play with the flavors. So I will do 7 of the jalapenos. I'll just cut the tops off and coarsely chop them in the processor. If you wanted to have a slightly milder salsa, you can also open up the pepper, remove the membrane and the majority of the seeds. These are extra fresh, so I just picked them this morning. Okay. Put these right into the pot. And now for the final vegetable for the salsa, tomatoes. So here's where, as I explained earlier, you can prep these in various ways. One, you can do as I'm doing, and I'm just going to simply core the little stem part out and put them in a food processor at a coarse chop. You can also blanch these, meaning, put a little X on the bottom, place them into boiling water for 30 seconds or so, take them out, put them in an ice water bath till they're, cool enough to touch, and then just peel the skin right off. And then you can chop them as you wish. So whichever way you prefer prepping your tomatoes, you do that. So that's what we're going to do now. We need 6 cups of chopped tomatoes. So that just takes that stem part and that kind of tough white part that's within the tomato. You see that tough part's now gone. We'll just cut them in half. You can use whatever variety tomato you like as well. I prefer using Romas. They have a lot of meat in the tomato itself, and they work really well for salsas and sauces and things like that. Start with that in there. 3 Romas, cut in half. So in just a few seconds, a nice coarse chop on the tomato. We have their nice, sweet, natural juices in there. So I'll keep prepping these tomatoes until we get to the 6 cups, and then we'll move on to the next step. So the tomatoes are all prepped. We did 6 cups of the tomatoes, and that ended up being 10 Romas. Now let's head over to the Dutch oven with all the fresh ingredients, and we'll add the spices and the acids that we will need for this canning project. So in a matter of minutes, we have all of these fresh ingredients coarsely chopped. So what I'll do is kind of mix these through a little bit. You can see the tomato, the zucchini, onion, bell peppers, jalapeno peppers. Really is a beautiful and fresh salsa. Okay, so now we will add to this 2 cans of tomato paste. This will just give it a little more of a rich tomatoey flavor. And now to this we will add the dry spices. We'll do 2 tablespoons of crushed red pepper flakes and 2 tablespoons of sweet paprika, 1 tablespoon of pickling salt, 1 tablespoon of garlic powder, 1 tablespoon of minced garlic, 1 tablespoon of ground cumin, 1 tablespoon of ground coriander, 1 tablespoon of mustard powder, and 1 teaspoon of ground black pepper. Now to add a little sweetness, we'll add 3 tablespoons of brown sugar. Now for the acids, we'll add 1 cup of lime juice and 1 cup of white vinegar. This is 5% acidity. Now let's mix this all together. So now we'll bring this up to a boil and let this simmer for 15 minutes once it reaches that boil. So we'll let this cook and we'll come back and check the progress. Okay, so this came to a boil and I've been letting it cook for about 15 minutes. So now it's ready to be put into the canning jars. Okay, so now let's get these jars filled here. I have them off to the side in the stock pot. I'll use my little canning ladle here. My canning funnel will fill them to about a 1/2 inch headspace. If you have a headspace tool, you can use that. Otherwise, it's usually about midway up the threads of the canning jar. That's good. Okay, let's get these other jars filled here. I look forward to trying this salsa. This salsa smells really good. You can really smell the cumin and the peppers, the jalapenos, and just the freshness of all these different vegetables. It smells really good. So let's keep filling these jars here. And we'll get them processed. The texture is really great. It's a nice, coarse, chopped, nice chunky salsa with a little bit of fluid still, a little bit of liquid. Nice consistency. So I'm using wide mouth pint jars for this. I like to use the wide mouth. for salsas and things like that. Let's see here. And I also like to use these little half pint jars, wide mouth again. These are a really nice size for sharing, and it's a great serving size just to put out on a platter. You know, if you're having a little dinner party or just some friends over, have a little, it's a perfect size to put the jar out with some chips and things. Let everyone enjoy your salsa creation. We'll get the rest of these jars filled up here, and then we'll move on to the next step, which is getting the lids and rings onto the jars so that they will be ready for processing. So here are the jars. Let me wipe the rims off and the side thread with a wet paper towel, and that's just to get any salsa or sauce off of the side of the jars, and it'll help to ensure a nice tight seal on the jars. Then we'll place the lid onto the jar, followed by the ring. You just do that finger tight. So we'll wipe off another here, including the sides. A nice clean surface. Get the lid on, followed by the ring. And the ring is just there to help hold the lid on. So once these are put into the water bath canner, they'll be processed, then they will go to the cooling area, and once they seal, the lid will suction down, and then the ring will be able to be removed very easily. Then you can save the ring for later for other canning projects. So let me just clean the rest of these jars, get their lids and rings on, and we will move on to the next step. Okay, so here's our water bath canner. It's up to the proper temperature. We'll set the lid off to the side here. Let's add the jars. We'll process them for 15 minutes. That all depends on your altitude. Once I get these jars loaded, I'll go over that a little further with what I mean by that. And just remember, when you're filling your water bath canner with the water, once the jars are loaded, you want them to be covered with water about 1 inch or 2. And just remember, when you're filling with the water, that these jars will displace that water, so don't overfill it. Let's get the lid back on and we'll start processing. So what I meant when I said that based on your altitude, your processing time may be slightly different. Here I have in the Ball Blue Book, it is the altitude chart, and it shows you when water bath canning or boil water method canning, it shows your altitude in feet, and based on that, it tells you how much to increase your processing time. So based on our altitude, we're doing the 15-minute processing time. Now that altitude chart and some sort of graph to tell you what you need to add for water bath canning timing or for pressure canning, which gauge you should use, that's in the Ball Blue Book as I showed you, as well as most of the other canning cookbooks you'll find out there. Your canner may also come with one that you can use as a guide. But that's good to know. If you live in a different elevation, just be mindful of that when you're processing your canning products. All right, so the processing time is finished. So let's get these jars out of the water bath canner and placed to the cooling and sealing area. Okay, so the second batch of salsa jars have finished processing, so we will remove the lid, let the jars sit for 5 minutes, and we'll move them to the cooling and sealing area. So here the jars are in the cooling and sealing area. We were able to make 11 wide mouth pint jars and 4 wide mouth half pint jars. I also did a little 4-ounce jar that I did not process. I just put right into the refrigerator for us to enjoy later today. So let's take a closer look at the salsa. So here's a closer look at the zucchini salsa, and it turned out really nice. They're big specks of the different colored vegetables and pepper flakes and things like that in there. It's a really attractive salsa, and I was tasting it as I was cooking, and it's quite tasty as well. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video today of part 3 of what to do with all that zucchini. This is a sweet and spicy zucchini salsa. If you would like more ideas of what to do with your zucchini harvest or different recipes to use zucchini in, feel free to check out other videos in this multi-part series. We have some sweet as well as savory recipes that you can try out for yourself. Well, I hope you're having a wonderful day today and you enjoyed spending time in the kitchen with me while we made this zucchini salsa. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. See you next time. Take care.